Hey there, I'm Kate Sculpts and I love sculpting, as you can tell by my name. Today I made a fawn, a deer and a jackalope to create a mushroom-filled whimsical diorama. So let's get started. To begin, I just grabbed some thick metal wire and cut it out, giving a nice length that can stretch through one leg, up the torso and shoulder area, and then back down the other leg, so I don't have to worry too much about flimsying around with more wire for limbs later on that will just end up getting in my way. Using some thin wire, I also bulk out the legs and arms, and then with foil I wrap it around to give it a sort of smoother area so that I can apply the clay without too many lumps and bumpies. You might notice just in a second that the hips are rather large and the waist is quite small. This is a stylistic choice so that the fur on the legs later on looks much more prominent and more like a focus point, in contrast to the waist, which isn't all that interesting as it's not as whimsical and fun as the, fluffy hips and legs will be. I then beat the clay with my rolling pin so that it's nice and soft and malleable, so that when I roll it out it doesn't hurt the palms of my hands, which always happens. And then I go in with some clay glue on the armature to make sure that that clay sticks down nicely. I of course wrap the clay around, and as it's quite thin there is a lot of kind of lumps and bumps around the body, which I then have to go in later on with some extra thinner pieces of clay to smoothen it out so that it's not too lumpy. But when it comes to the legs, that doesn't really matter, as I will be adding kind of little swirls of clay onto them later on, so if it is lumpy, in the end you won't be able to see it, but the main matter is the torso area, so I do need to make sure that that's nice and smoothened out. Also add the ribs, just using a little bit of extra clay and my metal tools. Again, I've always stuck by silicone tools, but recently the metal tools have been in my favour, so I've been using them a lot more often, and I've gotten to like them quite a lot. I had some extra clay for the tummy kind of area, and then using that silicone tool. I mean, I did just say that I stopped using my silicone tool. I do use them still every once in a while. I use the silicone tool to make the belly button and that sort of dividing line up the torso, which is usually there, I guess. I don't know. Um, I'm somewhat familiar with anatomy. I did this without using a proper figure of anatomy to check what I'm actually doing, but for the most part I think it's relatively anatomically correct, at least for the basics. And then I attach it to the base and start working on the hands. Tedious. Say it every time, and I'm not going to stop saying it every time because it's true, and you need to know that, because if you're not an artist, then how are you going to know the struggle that I have to go through every time I make hands? And it's completely self-inflicted, so I don't know why I'm complaining, but I still want to complain anyways because I'm a complainer. On the hands I add the little fingers, and I do have to admit I've gotten better at hands. The last time I made a sort of human figure in this sort of style was, I think, the Mushroom Goddess, and the hands on that weren't too great, but I've definitely improved since then. Of course, because she is a fawn, I give her some hooves before moving on to the legs, and again, like I said, I know I say that phrase so often, like I said, I didn't have to smoothen out the legs too much because this is the fur I was talking about that's gonna cover up all those lumpies and bumpies. To make this sort of fur texture, I have done it in my past videos. For example, Ludo, one of my favourites. I make these sort of little squiggles of clay in different shapes, sizes, and directions, and then I add them on, smoothen them out, and then I texture them, kind of going row by row. So I don't put one on then texture it. I put one on, put a bunch on around the same row, and then I texture them all at once, and then move up a row and kind of go in between the last ones. That probably doesn't even make any sense, but it makes sense to me because I'm the one who's doing it. That's really, I'm a great teacher. I forgot to add the tail before finishing all of the fur, so I did actually have to take off some of the little strands just to fit that tail in. And then I start working on the moss top, I guess. If you've seen me make moss before, pretty much what I do is I grab little balls of clay, put them on, smoothen them out, and then using this hooked ball tool, which is just a tool with a little ball at the end that is hooked to the side, I squiggle it in there to make it kind of look all rough and mossy. And then I start working on the moon, which is going to be in her left hand, all right, but her left. And I've never made a mood before, but it's quite similar to a banana. So I just kind of went with that, I guess. Made a little banana shape, cut out some of the excess, and I wanted it to be quite thin, quite a like thin, not cartoonish moon, but I guess cartoonish, because when it comes to moons, when you see a moon in the sky, it's not just like half the moon is missing, it's still there, isn't it? So it is technically stylized. It's not an actual moon, because if it were, she would be holding a ball. But that's too boring. I want it to be a little cute moon. And then I start working on the face. I've made faces before. Again, I'm getting better. I think a few improvements that I'd need to work on is the mouth area, as well as getting the eyes deep enough. I think a problem that I face is I make the eyes too shallow into the head. I think I need to press that area in a bit more deep. Also, a tip that I have sort of discovered when creating a face is you don't need to add clay, just move it. You don't need to take away clay, you don't need to add clay. I think the only time you'd ever need to add clay is for the eyes, by, you know, putting the ball into the eye and grabbing some extra like strands of clay to make the eyelids, but that's pretty much it. The rest of the face is just about kind of moving clay, making the nose by building up the cheek area around it and then squishing it in, and the eye sockets is just pressing it in, and etc, etc. You know what I'm talking about. Then after that I could put it in the oven and then sand it down so that it's nice and soft and smooth, because again, I've had it in the past where I've made a face and then didn't smooth it down afterwards using sandpaper, and it just ended up looking really weird and lumpy. I think this one still did end up looking a little bit lumpy, but in the end it was certainly better than what I've done in the past. And again, because she's a fawn, I give her some horns, as well as those cute little ears, which I did earlier. Her neck, I started off by making it just a little bit too thick, so I had to shave it down, and then I added other anatomical things, I guess, like the collarbones and neck pieces. I don't know. When it comes to hair, again, not very... I don't really know how to do hair, but I guess I've come up with a new style for curly hair at least. Pretty much I grab a little piece of clay, flatten it, and then I twirl it. Like that. It has no texture on it, I'll give it that, but it has a nice definition, so that you can tell that it's a curl without it being a little bit too convoluted with little bits and pieces and textures and stuff. To make the hair I do use cos clay. Cos clay is that bendable clay where after it is baked it is still able to move, it just has a sort of rubbery consistency. I guess it's sort of rubbery. It's not really rubbery, but it's just squishy. Not squishy. It's not squishy. It's movable. That's pretty much what it is. And then I go in and make some sort of... They almost look like raindrops, but it's like little pendants for a body necklace and a just regular necklace on the neck. They're all going to be painted purple later on, which I decided after looking at the colour palette that I used and going, I love lavender, so I'm going to use that colour because, I mean, that's how it pretty much goes. I see a colour, I like it, I use it. I also give her a sort of bracelet on one hand and then sort of like a wrap-around bracelet on the other, I guess. Then onto the base, I add some clay down, which will act as the base for when I start building up the moss by adding bigger balls of clay. I guess bigger than what I did for the top, because it's a bigger area of effect that the moss is going to be on. So yeah, big bits of clay, and then I smoothen them out and then go in with the ball tool to create that texture all along it. I didn't really explain it that much last time, but pretty much the ball tool is like just a little ball at the end, and then what I did was I used some pliers and curved it round so that what you can do is I can kind of scoop up that moss and kind of mix it and scoop it and give it all those little dots and stuff. I quite like it because it ends up really nice and stylized. Then with some cabochons here, I go and paint the back of them, which is the flat side, so that I can make the bunny's eyes. Oh, it's not a bunny, it's a jackalope. I will keep referring to it as a bunny because I can't remember. I just can't remember. I've done it so many times when referring to it. I keep saying bunny. It's just a jackalope. Get it right, Kate. Anyways, I think this is one of the cutest pieces of this whole sculpture, honestly. I can't ever remember making a bunny before. I don't know if oh wait, no, I take it back, I have. It's a very big bunny, but it's a bunny. But not one as small and cute as this though, and I think it's really nice and sweet. So I added some big, not floppy ears. Some bunnies have floppy ears, some have kind of harder ears that stick upright. This is kind of an in-between. Yeah, added those on, and then some antlers. Of course, because it's a jackalope, it's a mix between a jackrabbit and a deer, so it's gonna be a rabbit with deer horns. So I make those little mini horns and give it a nose, and I mean, there's not much else to say. It's a little jackrabbit. I think it's just adorable. I'm thinking of just making some just on their own because I just can't get enough of them. I love it. I love it. It's just a little cute bunny. And then I go in and texture it using the tools which I created in my last video. Go watch it, go watch it. I'm so stupid. Anyways, pretty much just adding texture. And then onto the deer. If you couldn't tell by now, they are 3 creatures with horns. I did make a mistake and did add another creature. Not included in the title. It's almost like a secret. Because it is round the back. I mean, you can't see it unless you actually look at the back of the sculpture, but you know, it doesn't have horns. Whoopsies. I was trying to go with the rule that they all had horns and then I forgot. I made something without horns. Anyways, this deer was quite difficult to make. I have made deers before and they're tedious because their legs are kind of bent in that sort of backwards way. A human's knees bend forwards. A lot of other animals' knees bend kind of inwards and backwards. So when I'm trying to create an animal like this, it's so hard for my brain to remember which way the legs are supposed to go. Even when I'm looking at a reference, like I'm directly looking at a reference on my screen, and then I make the legs face the wrong way around because I can't figure it out. My brain just can't tell the difference between what's facing what way. This is the animal which I was talking about, which doesn't have horns, which is a hedgehog. I could have just given it horns, but I guess it wouldn't have really made sense, would it? So I make 2 of these little things. They're simple and easy, just like a almost little teardrop shape, and then texture the top to give it those sort of spikies. And then I make the mushrooms. You know me. You know me. If I'm making a diorama like this in a kind of woodland scene, I'm going to make mushrooms. But this time I added a twist to it. I made sort of different types of mushrooms instead. So of course you have the regular ones, which are the fly agaric or something like that, or whatever. But also I then add some beach mushrooms, which are those sort of like little, not spindly, but ones that are all kind of clumped together coming from one source out of the ground. I add some puffball mushrooms as well, which are those sort of bulbous balls, I guess, just white balls. I also have the little kind of brown toadstool mushrooms, which again I use quite often as they're quite simple and recognisable, and I mean, I think they're kind of similar to like chestnut mushrooms, which are the ones which you would very usually eat in most, you know, food with mushrooms in them. It can take quite a long time to make all of these mushrooms. I think in total there were about probably 60 of them, and they could take hours just to make them all, and yeah, and can get quite difficult because of all the little spindly bits, but I always manage to do them in the end because it's quite a calming thing to do, just make a bunch of mushrooms. And the puffball mushrooms, I do use some liquid polymer clay and dot it on the top with a paintbrush just so that it gives a sort of squishier, bouncy kind of texture. I don't really know how to describe it. And then after baking all of the mushrooms, which I've never done before, I never pre-bake the mushrooms, but I decided to this time, and it worked so well just to help them so that I don't smush them when I put them on. But yeah, I go around placing all the mushrooms, trying to put them into certain groups and areas, like all of one type in an area, kind of very slightly mixed with other types, if that makes sense. And then I add all of the creatures, also giving the deer its hooves, which I didn't add beforehand because it would have been a little bit too difficult. Then I just bake the entire thing together and get to painting. We've seen this all before. I go in with some green paint and dot it into all of those little cracks and crevices and dots of the moss. I start off with the darkest colour, and then once that has dried, which can take quite a while because of all the clay in the little crevices, I go in with a slightly lighter colour and dry brush on top, and then a lighter colour and then a lighter colour. To dry brush, you just need a little bit of paint on the end of your brush and you glide it over the top of the surface. And what I usually do is I start with the darkest colour on the bottom and then I work up to the lightest colour. When it comes to moss, that will actually usually be gold for me. I use gold to give it a glow so that it looks like it is kind of glowing. I think it works quite well. I haven't always done it that way, but I think there was a sculpture last year or something that I made and I added it very slightly, and then I just decided to run with it because it works and it just makes it glow and look so much more lively. And then when painting the body, I do actually use a sponge so that it doesn't clump up and get streaky in areas which I want to be nice and smooth. I have done this before. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked properly, but now it does because I'm using the sponge right instead of dragging it. I'm actually kind of patting it on. Don't know why I was dragging it before, it's not very smart of me, but yeah, that kind of evens out all of the colour and texture just so that it looks smooth and not weird and liney. At the moment, the skin colour, even though you can't really tell on the camera, it looks a little bit dead almost, so I go in with a lighter colour and apply that on the sort of raised areas around the body, like the fingertips and cheeks as well on the face, and then I go in with slightly pinker cheeks and a pink tone for all areas like that, like even the fingertips I do that sort of pink, and then elbows as well, just so that it adds a little bit more, oh my gosh, it adds a little bit more variation and makes it look a little bit more lively. For the hair on the legs, I decided to go with a brown colour. I was thinking of going with ginger as the hair on her head is ginger, but I decided just to keep it a nice brown, as, I mean, when ginger hair is kind of clumped all together, it can turn out looking quite brown, and having the legs quite thick and full with fur, I think it would look nice like that. I say that as if I'm a proper ginger. I'm slightly ginger, kind of. It's annoying. I actually wish I was ginger. I have no soul. And then I dry brush on top, and it does end up looking just a little bit more ginger like the head. And then, of course, the moss as well on the top area. Have to wait for that to dry before dry brushing on it. The colour that I use for the hair is very ginger, very orange, very ginger, and I love it that way. When creating humans, I always tend to go with my type of likeness with ginger hair and pale skin, just because it's something that I'm familiar with. I mean, I look at myself and that's what I see. I see ginger and pale, because that's who I am. But I'm not even proper ginger. I swear, I have a soul. And then, like I said, with those pendants, are going with the purple, and the moon is sort of undertone yellow, and then overtone will be a whiter kind of colour. I do need to blend some of this paint together, making the deer, so I use just a little bit of water just to make sure that that blending process goes nice and smooth instead of looking weird and clumpy. There are some like things I miss out when recording, like filling in the eyes on the deer, but pretty much I add some paint kind of between that little crevice in the eye, and it just ends up, you know, bringing that eye colour out. Not eye colour because it's closed, but it's just making it look like there is an eye there and not just a weird eyeless head. When it comes to the bunny, I start off with a white and then I go in with brown on top of it, very gently colouring it in with that brown, because I just want it to look very slightly brown. I don't want it to be too overpowering, and I think it ends up looking very cute and sweet. And then the mushrooms, I just, of course, add the red on all of those ones with the little spots on them, brown on the other ones, and then a sort of orange on the beach mushrooms. I think it's quite a nice difference to what I would usually do with just the red and the brown. And I didn't show it, but the puffball mushrooms, I painted white and then dry brushed a very gentle brown on top to make them kind of look a little bit dirty. I prefer that quite a lot. As I always say, you can never have enough white dots in a mushroom, so I add as many as I can, cramming it into there, pretty much just overpowering it, but I think it looks quite nice and always looks a little bit more whimsical by the end of it. The painting on the hedgehogs is quite simple, just a few different tones of brown and a little bit of that kind of creamy white on top to bring out the quills. And then I just scratch off the paint from the bunny rabbit's cabochon and add some gloss onto the moon on top. And then we're all finished. I am chuffed. I've really improved on humans, and I think this year my goal is to get even better. I can't say we've done a proper woodland mystical kind of sculpture in a while, so I hope you're glad they've made a return, and I think soon I'm going to get back into the flow of things. I know I've been so flaky at the moment, I'm really trying, but I'm almost there. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a comment. Genuinely reading your comments makes me so happy, and I hope you're all having a great start to the year. I know it's pretty much March now, so it's great to know that things are getting moving, but I hope you're all doing okay, and also subscribe if you want to see more like this. My next video is going to be something slightly different. It's still going to be a sculpture, of course, but the theming of it is going to be a little bit different, but I can't wait to show you. Have an amazing day, and I will see you guys next time. Bye bye!